My name is Tony Alves. I'm Senior Vice President of Product Management at Highwire. I will briefly introduce today's topic as well as moderate questions and discussions. First, let's do our housekeeping. This webinar, it's being recorded. That recording, it will be shared after the meeting. It will be freely accessible, so please feel free to share it with colleagues and with friends once it's available. Also, please put your questions in the question box and put them in there as you think of them, and we'll answer those questions during the end, during the Q&A. We always leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. It's actually the most one of the most popular parts of our webinar series is the time that we get to spend talking with you guys and answering the questions. So just to set a little bit of background from the Highwire perspective, you know, we've seen this revolution in how scientific discoveries are being reported. More and more scientists and researchers, they're uploading early drafts of their research papers to online repositories that we all know as preprint servers. You know, traditionally, the preprint, it's a version of a research article that is made available to other researchers before formal peer review takes place. And, you know, preprints, they've been a disrupting force in scholarly publishing and in scholarly communication for a while. And although we have seen preprints assimilate into journal workflows, primarily through the transfer of manuscripts between preprint servers and traditional journals, we also are now seeing that preprints are evolving, that those preprint workflows are evolving, especially around peer review. And though they're really affecting the peer review process in interesting ways, and you will hear much more about that from our panel. Just a little bit about Highwire's involvement. You know, we've been able to participate in this evolution through our relationship with Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, the host of bioRxiv and medRxiv. These preprint servers use Highwire's bench press submission system to receive and screen preprints and Highwire's hosting platform to display the preprints and associated comments. Again, you'll hear much more about this from our panel, but first I want to identify some useful and interesting resources that you can explore after the webinar. Some of these, let's see, these, first I want to point you to the Reimagined review. So there are several services available that perform independent peer review of preprints. There were two in particular that you'll hear more about in this webinar, Review Commons and Peer Community N, or PCI. They're just two of many examples of preprint peer review that has emerged around preprints. A comprehensive list called Reimagined Review has been compiled by ASAP Bio, which is a nonprofit organization promoting evolution of the peer review process. So I encourage you to take a look at Reimagined Review, again, after the webinar. As mentioned, many journals allow researchers to submit articles that were originally posted as preprints. In fact, processes and protocols have been developed to automate the transfer of manuscripts from preprint servers to journals' submission systems and vice versa. The Manuscript Exchange Common Approach, or MECA, the MECA protocol, is one such mechanism. It was developed by a group of publishing workflow vendors. MECA, it's used to transfer research articles, including commentary and peer review, from system to system in an automated, machine-readable way. And MECA, it's a NISO recommended practice. Another interesting innovation that's being used in preprint peer review is an XML framework called DocMaps, which captures the editorial process used in evaluating a piece of research. Emily will be talking about DocMaps in detail, so I won't talk about it now. But these are two articles that were published in the Council of Science Editors publication Science Editor that describe these technologies. Finally, I want to share another useful resource for learning more about preprint peer review and community peer review. Last year, I served as a guest editor for the online publication Commonplace. published by Knowledge Futures. This is a series of articles that examine editorial processes in communities that are built around those processes. The articles in the series explore diverse and innovative approaches to peer review and also how technology is being utilized in creative ways. So now let's get to our panel. First up, we have Richard Sever, Assistant Director at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory and co-founder of bioRxiv and medRxiv. Richard will provide an overview of how preprint review fits into the research ecosystem. Second, we have Denis Bourguet and Thomas Guillemaud, co-founders of Peer Community In, which is a free recommendation process of scientific preprints based on peer reviews. Denis and Thomas will describe the workflow of Peer Community In, how it interacts with other services such as preprint servers, open archives, and journals. Third, we have Thomas Lemberger, Head of Open Sciences Implementation and Deputy Head of Scientific Publications at EMBO Press. Thomas will share his experience with integrating journal agnostic peer review of preprints with the journal publishing process. He'll also talk about the importance of catalyzing a cultural shift in the practice of peer review and about his recent efforts in advancing technologies supporting transparent and portable peer review for preprints. And finally, we have Emily Esten, DocMaps project lead at Knowledge Futures. Emily will discuss the DocMaps project, which aims to surface editorial workflows in a machine-readable, extensible, interoperable format to support the diverse preprint review ecosystem, as well as surfacing other important and useful information around the editorial process. I'm particularly interested and excited about that project from a technology and product perspective, being able to transfer information about an editorial process along with any piece of research. So I will now turn it over to Richard. I'm going to stop my share.
Okay, thanks very much, Tony. Let me share my screen and get us going. Okay, I guess you can all see that. So yeah, what I want to do is really just give a very quick high-level overview before we start focusing on the people who are actually doing the interesting things, who I think you want to hear from. So let me just introduce the concept of preprints very briefly to remind people what we mean by a preprint. This is a very simplified slide showing traditional peer review. It's a simple version of a more complicated one because, as everybody knows, that there are all sorts of loops and revisions. But the key point here is that when an author submits a paper to a journal, it undergoes editorial evaluation and peer review, various other processes. And that takes a certain amount of time before anybody can actually read the paper before it's made public. And so the notion of a preprint is essentially that an author can share their work before this process happens. It doesn't preclude the journal publication, but it allows somebody to read the paper almost immediately. So what we mean by a preprint is essentially an unpublished manuscript that's yet to be certified by that peer review process, but doesn't preclude it. And what we've seen in recent years is a real explosion in the number of different disciplines using preprints. Obviously, archive is more than 30 years old. That's the granddaddy of the field. It's more than 2 million preprints, mainly in the computational science, physics, and math community. And we launched bioRxiv in 2013 to really try to replicate the process in the biological sciences, and medRxiv later in 2019. And there's now more than 100,000, I think it's more than 200,000 preprints now across those two servers. But we've seen launches in chemistry with ChemArchive, SociArchive with social sciences, AgriChive for agricultural sciences, Earth Archive, Psi Archive, etc. And slide here is far from complete. I just mean it as an illustration of the number of discipline-specific community preprint servers along the archive bioarchive model that have basically sprung up in recent years since the launch of bioarchive. I should also point out that there are commercial alternatives as well. Springer Nature have a majority share in Research Square. Elsevier purchased the Social Science Research Network, which are also can function as preprint servers. Sage have launched Advance. There's Authoria, which purchased by John Wiley and can function as a preprint server, and preprints.org, which is another preprint server run by their publisher MDPI. One of the things that's interesting about preprints is rather than simply allowing authors to share their work early, they're an enabling technology and can stimulate evolution within the communication ecosystem. So, we'd like to think of bioarchive in particular as a hub that enables discovery, discussion of science before formal publication, a venue to allow people to put the kinds of work that wouldn't normally go into journals, studies of reproducibility, for example. And we also want to enable ways in which the work can go on to be evaluated by the scientific community, most notably through traditional journals, but also the growing idea of preprint review, in which the peer review process, just like the dissemination, becomes decoupled and doesn't all have to take place within the journal world. This can happen in a couple of different ways. So in one instance, an author makes a choice not to go to a traditional journal, so they post a paper on a preprint server and then go to an independent review service that perform a peer review akin to that goes on at a journal, but then distribute the results alongside the preprint on the preprint server, some form of verification, potentially display of the referees' reports. But the point is that the review service and the preprint server are serving as an alternative to a journal. Alternatively, the preprint review service can integrate into the traditional process. So what happens here is that an author submits to a preprint server, then goes to a peer review service that performs the peer review, but then feeds it to a journal. So in this case, the journal does not have to perform the peer review itself, merely the editorial decision as to whether or not to accept the paper on the basis of the peer reviews that have been secured by the peer review service. And this is a little like how Review Commons works, and Tom can talk a little bit more about that later. Since the emergence of these ideas, we've seen a number of new initiatives to perform preprint peer review. There's services like pre-review, which is mostly early career researchers learning how to do peer review, a self-organized approach that's really in some respects separate from the traditional publication process. ASAP Bio have been running an experiment on crowd preprint review, where many eyes are put on preprints to allow peer review to occur as a result of far more than the traditional 2 or 3 people that normally do it for a journal. During the pandemic, groups at Sinai and MIT initiated rapid task forces to peer review preprints on COVID-19. These have since expanded into areas beyond just COVID-19. So there's the preprint club, which is kind of like preprint journal club. That's the Sinai initiative, and RR infectious disease, which used to be called RRC19, which again is an independent peer review service that looks at preprints. More formal approaches that are akin to the ones I described in the earlier slide are Review Commons, which Thomas will tell you about, and peer community in which you'll hear about as well, and again serves a similar role. And then probably the most formal in some respects is preprint review, operated by eLife, which in some ways is going in the opposite direction. eLife sort of was a journal, But now every paper that goes into eLife has to go on a preprint, and they've reimagined themselves as a preprint review service, most notably with the recent decision only to perform peer review and not to make a kind of up-down acceptance reject judgment on that basis. So that's another thing that's kind of interesting about this whole preprint review idea, is it allows people to experiment with different types of peer review process. At bioRxiv, many of you will know, as Tony mentioned, that we have the B2J and J2B services that allow people to send papers to and from journals very easily. And we've expanded this to do something called B2X, where we can send papers from bioRxiv to other initiatives. These include data initiatives like DataSeer, but also peer review, preprint peer review, decoupled initiatives such as Review Commons. We also have a dashboard that allows the preprint server to display preprints that have been obtained by these independent review services. So this is an example here. You can see on the second tab of the dashboard, it's something that we call TRIP, Transparent Review in Preprint. And essentially, this is a hypothesis window controlled by the peer review service that allows them to display peer reviews of preprints alongside the preprint. So the important thing here is that the decoupling is preserved, because this window on the right-hand side, in this case, it's an eLife window, is controlled by eLife. This is not a bioRxiv peer review, this is an eLife peer review. And we do the same for Review Commons and various other groups. It's important that this kind of decoupled evolving ecosystem is mapped and people are able to navigate the different types of review that are happening. And this is what DocMaps does. And Emily will tell you more about that. And I think at this point, it's best that I just turn it over to the next person to tell you about how these initiatives work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. I believe Thomas and Denis are next. So
yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Tony. So I'm going to start the presentation, and then Denis will follow up. So we are going to present you the peer community in and the peer community journal. And basically, we started this initiative because we thought that there were some problems in this current scientific publication system. So we think that this system is too long, so a reader has to wait a long time before being able to read articles that are published. The system is opaque for various reasons, and most of all because more than 60% of the articles are still behind paywalls. The system can also be pernicious because the income of some publishers depends directly on the number of articles that they accept. So it may be a problem for the quality of science. It is also a system that is very expensive for the society, because the average cost for the whole society is about 3,000 euros per article, which is a lot of money for many places. And also this is quite surprising, because at the same time, researchers do a lot of the work for free, because they are authors, editors, reviewers. They write articles, evaluate articles, and edit articles. So these are the main reasons why we wanted to reappropriate the publication system, and we decided to create the peer community in, and then the peer community journal. So I'm going to explain how it works. So they are a kind of a double publication system. Here on the left, you have the peer community in, which is a service that peer reviews and publicly recommends some preprints. And once a preprint has been peer reviewed and recommended by a PCI, then they can be published, for instance, in the peer community journal on the right here, or they can be submitted to the many PCI-friendly journals or to any other journals that accept the submission of preprints. So it's a double publication system with peer review on the side and publication on the other side. So I'm going to explain first the PCI side, the peer review and the recommendations. So the PCI, the aim is to create communities of researchers that are handling the evaluation through peer review and who are recommending preprints in their scientific field. So the preprints are in preprint servers or open archives like bioRxiv, but also Zenodo, HAL, etc. And they work for some communities called PCI ecology, for instance, or PCI evolutionary biology, etc., etc. And there are 17 communities like that. So how it works? How does it work? So it's quite similar as the functioning of journals, but with some differences. The main differences will be highlighted. So first we ask the author. So an author is happy with the manuscript, okay, with the preprint. They have to first deposit their data, their scripts, their codes into repositories. And then they have to deposit their article in a preprint server. And in parallel, or just after, they have to submit the URL of their preprint data code and scripts to one of the PCI. So for instance, peer community in ecology. And there, one of the many PCI recommenders who play the role of associate editor will handle the evaluation of the article. If there is no handling, then the article is not considered for evaluation. If there is a PCI recommender handling the evaluation of the article, they invite peer reviewers, like in journals, okay? The reviewers will make some peer reviews, and based on the peer reviews, the PCI recommender will make an editorial decision, a real editorial decision, okay? It can be to reject the article, it can be to ask for modification to the authors, and then the authors have to deposit successive versions of the article in the preprint server. And after one or several rounds of peer review here, there can be a final decision, so a rejection of the article or an acceptance of the article. So if the article is accepted, this is the green arrow here, we ask the authors to deposit a final version of the article with a clear label indicating that the article has been peer-reviewed and recommended by the PCI. And at the same time, we ask the PCI recommender to write what we call a text of recommendation, which is a text explaining the reasons why they decide to accept the article, describing the merits of the article. And we also post here and we publish all the editorial process with all the peer reviews, the answers of the authors, etc. And this is an open access, of course, on the preprint server and in the PCI website. At the end of this process, you have a PCI recommended preprint with a clear label indicating that it has been validated. And we have this recommendation text on the PCI website. Everything is in open access. This is open peer review. We have open data, open code. And this is a final, valid, findable, and citable article outside journals. We also have developed multiple links between the preprint servers, open archives, and the PCI recommendations. So for instance, we have developed a simple badge for the preprints that can be in any open archives or any preprint server. So for instance, if you click on this badge on this preprint that is posted in bioRxiv here, you land on the page of the recommendation that has been written by peer community in evolutionary. Click on this button here to go back to the preprint server. You go back to the web page of the articles that has been peer reviewed and recommended. We also have a relationship with bioRxiv. So Richard already told you about this TRIP, the transparent review in preprint, and we participate to this. And we also have a kind of automatic notifications that are made toward an open archive that is called HAL, which is the main open archive in France. And we are going to develop that with many other open archives. So for bioRxiv, Richard already showed that, but if you click on this green square here, you can have a link for the peer reviews and the recommendations that have been written by PCI evolutionary biology in that case, and you can go directly to the PCI website where you can see all the editorial process about this preprint. And of course, you can go back to the bioRxiv website by clicking on this green button. And for HAL, when we use these automatic notifications, you can have here a clear display of the fact that the article has been peer-reviewed and recommended by the PCI, okay? And if you click on this, again, you go back to the recommendation page on the PCI website. Here it is, PCI ecology. And of course, you can click back to go to HAL to see the article on the Open Archive website. So this relationship with HAL is part of a larger project, which is called COAR Notify project. So it is a pilot project within the Notify project that is led by the Confederation of Open Access Repositories and funded mostly by Arcadia. And in this project, there is the goal to make a complete interoperability between some peer review services like PCI and many open archives, and for instance, HAL, but also Digital CSIC in Spain, and every open archive that will use or that use DSpace as a framework. So currently we have this one-way notification with HAL, but the second step is to develop this full interoperability so that we will be able to get the notification of the submissions from all the open archives to PCI, and then to get the notifications of the recommendations from PCI to each one of the open archives having the preprint in question. So I told you it was a double publication system. I will let Denis continue the part to explain you how peer community journal works. Denis. Denis, we cannot hear you, Denis.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Let me go back. I have first to put it and to share my screen again. Do you hear me this time?
Yes.
Excellent. Sorry about that. Thanks a lot, Thomas, for explaining peer community in. So as you explained, this is a double publication system. You explained the evaluation and recommendation part by PCI. And as you said, the authors can decide to let the preprint, the recommended preprint in the preprint server because this is a final and valid article. But for any reason, they can decide to publish it in a journal, so they can decide to publish it directly and for free in peer community journal, or they can decide to submit it for publication in PCI-friendly journals. So among those PCI-friendly journals, some of them accept without further peer review the publication of any PCI-recommended preprint, but other PCI-friendly journals commit to give a fast response, usually in less than 5 days, to a pre-submission inquiry. So they can decide to accept the preprint without further peer review. They can decide to send it again for further peer review, or they can decide that they are not interested by the paper. But because there is a fast response, the authors, if they are not satisfied by the answer, they can go back, decide to submit it to another PCI-friendly journal, or at any time they can decide to publish it in peer community journal. So about this peer community journal, we started this journal in November 2021. It accepts as is any and only PCI-recommended preprint. It is a Diamond Open Access journal, so it is free for readers. We publish everything in open access, and it is free for authors. We have already published more than 200 articles. It's a generalist Diamond Open Access journal. There is one section by PCI, so each time we create a new PCI, we create a new section in the journal. All articles are published with the CC BY license, and Peer Community Journal is already indexed in directory of an open access journal in CAB Abstract, Google Scholar, Dimensions, Crossref. It is compatible with the Plan S, and we have applied for indexation in the Web of Science and other databases. So once an article is published in Peer Community Journal, we add a button on the recommendation page in the corresponding PCI website to go directly to the article in the Peer Community Journal. For example, for this article, the authors decided to publish it in Peer Community Journal. So it's a recommendation in the PCI Ecology website. And you can see here this button now published in Peer Community Journal. If you click on it, you land to the peer community journal website on the page of the article. Here you can have access to the PDF of the paper. So if you click on it, this is the paper with the first page of the paper. And again, there is a link to the peer review and recommendation by PCI Ecology. If you click on this link, you go back to the PCI Ecology website on the recommendation page. So using PCI and peer community journal have several consequences. This is big savings for research agencies. With Thomas, we calculated that the cost of a paper that is going via PCI and peer community journal costs in average 300 euro compared to the 3,000 euro on average. The results are accessible to all right away because we are using preprints. There is a transparency of data, methods, script code, and the transparency of evaluation because we publish the peer reviews. The editorial policy of a journal is replaced in our case by a clear and argued recommendation text. There is a single evaluation that can be used by several journals, several PCI-friendly journals, and PCI allow a recognition of the reviewers and recommenders' work because, again, we publish reviews and recommendation text. So just to give you some figures about PCI, as said by Thomas, we have now 17 PCIs. We have received a little more than 1,000 manuscripts, almost recommended 500 of them. You can see that there's these recommenders, the equivalent of associate editors, almost 2,000, almost 100 PCI-friendly journals, and more than 150 supporting organizations. There is a recognition by funders by PCI of the PCI recommended preprint because peer review preprints are now considered by most Coalition S organizations to be equivalent and same merits and status as peer-reviewed publications that are published in recognized journals. And PCI and peer community journals have been endorsed by several institutions, so a lot of French institutions, but step by step by foreign institutions in North America, in United Kingdom, in Europe, and several other countries. What we did also with the team of PCI, we developed, we created the Pci Manifesto. It's a way for scientists to commit to submit at least one of their best articles to a PCI for peer review by the end of this year, and of course, maybe next year, and if recommended, to publish it in peer community journal. And this has been a quite success with more than 1,000 scientists that have signed so far. So I stop here, and of course, during the discussion, we could answer any questions you have. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Denis and Thomas. And just wanted to remind everybody to please put any questions you have in the question box so that we can have a useful and interesting conversation later, covering the things that you're interested in hearing and learning more about. So, okay, so our other Thomas from Review Commons, you're up. So,
okay, excellent. So I will keep consistency with the French accent as much as I can. And let's see if this is working. Do you see the presentation okay?
I do. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to follow up now on preprint peer review with the Review Commons platform that we have started at EMBO. And indeed, one of the key motivation of Review Commons is to promote a new culture in the practice of peer review. So what is Review Commons? It is a platform that provides journal agnostic peer review of preprints that are submitted by the authors to the platform. We support bioRxiv and medRxiv, and are implemented in the very same way as you saw demonstrated by PCI and by Richard. We are working with 21 partner journals to whom we transfer the reviewed preprint for formal consideration. We have launched the platform end of 2019 in collaboration with ASAP Bio. And the platform is operated by EMBO Press, professional editors located here at EMBO. We're fortunate to be supported by HHMI, and together with EMBO, this is running the platform. So we have three major objectives with Review Commons. The first one is to accelerate the access to peer-reviewed research, and this is why we post the reviews next to the preprint, and also I should mention the reply from the authors to these reviews as soon as possible. This is what we call a reviewed preprint or refereed preprint, which means exactly the same. Now, on the side of the journal, we would like really to make the publication process more efficient and to eliminate cycles of repeated and redundant peer review. As you know, when a paper is rejected at a journal, it's often submitted to a second one that will start the peer review from scratch, leading to a complete waste of resources on the side of the reviewers, but also on the side of the journals. And finally, maybe more deeply, we want to spark this cultural shift really with the practice of peer review by asking very explicitly the reviewers to focus on the science, on the paper as it is and not as it should be, to fit a given scope, and to really look at the conclusions and the claims that the authors have decided to write in their paper, look at the evidence that backs up these claims, and of course the significance and the contribution of that piece of research in the current body of knowledge. So how does it work? A paper, a preprint or a manuscript is being submitted by the authors to Review Commons. We now request preprint posting at submission stage. We have a pre-selection and editorial pre-selection process in collaboration with an academic advisory board. We send out approximately 80% of the papers out for review. The peer review is handled by our professional editors who use their trusted network of peer reviewers. And once the peer review is complete, we have an initial consultation across all the reviewers who can comment on each other's report to make sure that there is a sufficient consensus. And we return the reports to the authors. There is no editorial decision after peer review. There is no accept, reject after peer review. We do not make any recommendation of potential target journals. We really remain journal agnostic. At that point, the authors have time to prepare a response, and we consider this really as an integral part of the peer review process. And the set of reviews plus the author's response will be posted then alongside the preprint on bioRxiv or medRxiv. And this constitutes sort of the first output of Review Commons, the reviewed preprint. Now, at the same time, the authors can transfer their already reviewed manuscript, including their reply to the reviewers, to one of 21 journals. If the first journal is not interested, the authors can immediately submit to a second one, a third one, and a fourth one. We do not allow parallel submission, so this is a sequential process where every journal has the time to make a fully informed decision based on the content of the reviews, and we would not like to parallelize this process too much. If a journal is interested, they will formulate their request for revision according to the points raised by the reviewers and finally publish the paper. At this time, most of the journals that collaborate with Review Commons also post then the reviews next to the published paper, including their editorial decision letter. So offering a full transparency into the review and the revision process. So we have these two important modules in Review Commons. The first one is really coupled to open science and preprint. It's journal agnostic by definition. The reviewers do not know to which journal the paper is going to be submitted. And the second one is journal compatible and has a clear goal to accelerate and make the formal publication process more efficient. So we work with partners from PLOS, the PLOS family of journals, Company of Biologists, EMBO Press, of course, eLife, Molecular Biology of the Cell from ESCB, as well as the Journal of Cell Biology from Rockefeller University Press. And we have asked our partners to report back how many papers they have published with review comments that were published with review comments. And you see here the distribution across the different partners, and a fairly sort of balanced distribution across all the publishers, which indicates that the fact that the peer review process is run by EMBO does not really influence the final target of the papers. We are fortunate to extend now progressively more and more our consortium. Right now, we have 4 journals joining, and several others are in discussion. Genome biology, which is a great extension to expand the scope to genome biology and genomics. Genes and Development from Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory Press. Biochemical Journal, and Immunology and Cell Biology. And again, we are going to continue expanding the scope, starting from our core scope of cell and molecular biology and extending it progressively. Now, we have asked our current partners to report back how many times they had to invoke new reviewers for published papers. And you see here the result for papers that were processed in 2020 and 2021. 95% of the papers that were published in these journals did not involve any new reviewers, only on a very small number of cases that needed arbitration. Maybe some of the reviewers originally contacted were not available anymore, needed additional reviewers. So that was a great success. We asked also our community, what did they think about this journal agnostic peer review process, whether we should really remain clear and ask reviewers to only review the science, while scope and editorial selection should be the job of journals. And the response was very clear. There was a very strong support for the journal agnostic peer review and trying to dissociate editorial selection at the journals from the scientific evaluation, including, of course, the significance and advance of the science. So we try to now promote this cultural shift and the practice of a reviewed preprint. To show the good example, at EMBO, we have changed our eligibility criterion of a very popular grant scheme, the postdoctoral fellowship, where postdocs, where PhDs can obtain a fellowship to do a postdoc. So this is a very popular grant scheme at EMBO. And we used to ask for a first author published paper in any journal, and we have extended now to a first preprint, reviewed preprint, provided the reviews are made public and are fully available. And we see this not as a guarantee of quality, but as a sign of engagement with open science policy, and of course as a preprint that can be used in a slightly more efficient way by selection committees, since they are associated with reviews. So this has been now followed up by a change of policy by Plan S, a coalition of funders in Europe that promote open science. And we had an important meeting last year to discuss with funders how preprint peer review can be supported by institutions and by funders. Now, this is at the policy level and at the editorial level, and we will hear now in the last talk more about the technology. There are, of course, technological aspects that are important to try to make this new form of review, and especially in maybe even more generally to make public reviews and transparent reviews more useful and more practical. How do we describe an entire peer review process across multiple platforms with different policies, different workflows? How can we exchange, aggregate, reference peer review? How can we attribute credit to reviewers? How can we use more the content of the peer review to guide readers on whether they should spend time reading a paper or not? And finally, difficult questions also, how to verify the integrity and authenticity of peer review. So these are big questions, and we try to contribute with the community with some projects and we have started an experimental website, the early evidence base that aggregates reviewed preprint across multiple platforms. We assign DOIs to individual peer reviews. So we have an open source a project called MekaDOI funded by the Wellcome Trust, where we try to leverage the Meka standard to extract metadata that describes sufficiently the reviews and the peer review process such that the metadata can be deposited on Crossref to then assign a DOI to individual reviews, which is very useful to make these reviews citable, but it's also maybe even more useful to use then the relationships that are encoded in Crossref. Given a preprint DOI, it is then very easy to see if it has been peer reviewed and where the reviews are posted and published. In a second project, we really collaborate with the DocMaps, and I'm not going to describe DocMaps. This is the last talk of today. We are great supporters of DocMaps. It's a very general framework to describe the peer review process and to encode many features and many variabilities in the review process. And we see this as a great chance to create a distributed ecosystem for preprint peer review. We expose an API on early evidence base that shows DocMaps that present all the review comments, reviews in a machine readable way, in a structured way. And we try now to develop a visualization of the peer review process that supports DocMap. It is visualized as a timeline with, importantly, the branding and the identity of the platforms that have contributed to this different timeline, but also offer a sort of a traditional, comfortable access to the content of the review without leaving the page and being able to browse through the different reviews, and importantly also the response to the authors. So we really see this as very important to present the peer review as a package, since these reviews have been commissioned together to cover a complementary side of a paper. So to finish, a little bit of a perspective, I think the current system with the journals is that we are working independently. We compete, of course, for manuscript, which is not obligatory a bad thing. So we want all the journals want to publish the best science, which is great for the authors. But we also compete for reviewers, and this is there is no great justification for competing for reviewers, and this is really something that we would like to avoid. There is no interest across publishers or across journals to try to compete for such limited resources as reviewers. So we see review comments as an attempt to really couple open science, preprint to reviewed preprint, with a more efficient operation of the publication process by joining forces where we can, by trying to reuse maximally the review process, of course, catalyzing also this cultural change. And we think that as this system can expand, and not only EMBO Press can contribute to the peer review process, but other publishers have shown interest in doing that, we will make the system more efficient and benefit from economies of scale. So this is what I wanted to present. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Thomas. And now we have, last but not least, we have Emily Esten here to talk about DocMaps. Emily, over to you. You'll want to unmute yourself.
Yes, perfect. So hi, everyone. I'm Emily Esten. As Tony mentioned, I'm the project lead for DocMaps at the Knowledge Futures Group, and I want to thank everyone else for their presentations today. So what we've been talking about through the last few presentations are all the different ways that preprint review can happen. You've seen two different approaches through review commons and peer community in. We know that lots of organizations fall into the preprint ecosystem. You have the infrastructure for publishing, you have all of these review communities, you have these aggregators that are pulling together the reviews and the preprints together, and you have discovery platforms like bioRxiv or medRxiv or your PMC for finding all of this content. And we can see through all of these organizations and platforms that they're contributing to this larger culture around preprint peer review. But one of the challenges in working in a distributed ecosystem is that you have all of this happening in all these different places, and there aren't necessarily ways of putting them in conversation with each other, putting them and sharing them. And the other problem that sort of has already been discussed by some of the other people out there is that when you have review happening on so many different platforms and in so many different places, we learn that peer review looks drastically different depending on who is performing that work. So in some places, peer review means that someone made a judgment. In other places, it means that there were multiple reviewers involved. In other cases, there was an author response and additional versions and the multiple rounds of review. Sometimes we can infer this information based on what is provided, but it's often not necessarily available in traditional publishing spaces what preprint review policies or peer review policies look like. And as we've seen in some of the other efforts, there are ways of trying to make that visible. And so DocMaps is a community endorsed framework for making preprint review processes visible with the goal of supporting the growing preprint review ecosystem. It's a joint effort between Knowledge Futures, eLife, EMBO, Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, and we have support from Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, but also previous versions and iterations of DocMaps have had support from ASAP PIO, TU Graz, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and other platforms as well. There are sort of three values that we like to talk about when I focus on DocMaps. So the first value being one around extensibility. So DocMaps is capable of representing a wide range of editorial processes events, ranging from a simple assertion that a review has occurred to a complete history of editorial comments on a document to a standalone review submitted by an independent reviewer. And we think this extensibility is really important because what people might want to include in a DocMap or view in a DocMap can be really depending on which platform is creating it. The second thing that's important is this machine readability. So making sure that DocMaps is represented in a format that can be interpreted computationally and translated into these various visual representations, like the timeline visualization that we just saw on Review Commons. And this allows for a couple things. First, that there is a computational verification of reviews, a really easy way to see that this review occurred, go back to see where the DOI or the URI links to. Interoperability, so being able to combine different reviews and processes across the distributed ecosystem. And the last thing that's really important in terms of value is discoverability. So we have, like I said, all of these events are happening in different places. We want DocMaps to be publishable in such a way that events are queryable and discoverable via a lot of different well-supported mechanisms. So that we can see this evaluation of a preprint happens in this one review group and others can find it and use it and display it in their own processes. So with those three values in mind, I'm going to walk through an example of what a DocMap looks like. So at its basics, a DocMap includes immutable assertions that describe the editorial context of a published document. So in this case, I'm going to walk through an example of an aggregator or publisher capturing context about the independent review services review of a preprint that is later published in a journal. So the DocMap that we're going to look at is actually created by EMBO through early evidence base, and it's going through the process of a peer community and review process. So here we have this preprint that is later published in a journal, peer community journal, in ecology. You can see here on their page, they've got this information that it's peer reviewed and recommended by PCI. So we do have some kind of review process in its past. We can see down here what it looks like on peer community in, where you could go read the preprint in the preprint server and see that it was later published in this larger slide that we see up here. And we see there was a couple steps to the review process. We've got this author reply, so there's multiple steps involved here. So here we can see sort of what that first step in terms of a DocMap looks like. So here on the left, we see what this looks like on early evidence base. There was this review that occurred. It was published on February 16th, 2023. And down here, we see what it looks like on PCI, where you have the recommendation, you have the title, and then information down here. And then on the right, we see what this looks like inside of a DocMap. So we've got these various steps. We've got this first step, this B0. The initial input being that a preprint was published in June 2022. You have this DOI where you could go back and read the original preprint. And then we have this assertion. So this preprint was reviewed. And that's its current status at this point. And then we have the actions that occurred. So in this case, we have this output, which shows that a review took place. And we have the DOI if you wanted to go back and view that review. In this case, we also have information about the participants. In this case, this includes anonymous. We know on PCI that you can actually go and view who did the review, but it's not included in the doc map at this time. Who was it, and then what their role was. In this case, it was peer reviewer. You could also have, for example, that next step of author reply, and that participant would include the actor, the name being the author, and their role being author here. And so then another step for this doc map is that we know it was later published. So we have this initial input, again, being this preprint that was submitted, its assertion being that it's published, and then the action here being a journal publication. So we have that down here in outputs. We've got the type, and then we have the URI and DOI if someone wanted to follow up and view that. And then here on the left, we can see this is what it looks like on bioRxiv. And then we can see here, this is what it looks like in Peer Community Journal. So we can see here, this is all these different pieces of this distributed ecosystem coming together. We have the reviews taking place on Peer Community In, and have those reviews indexed by EMBO's early evidence base. And so we have this doc map in place, and this containing all of this information in the past. And so we have this one preprint with its various outputs, the reviews, the journal article, its representation in various aggregators or catalogs exists throughout the system. We're able to see those representations, and we have a way of storing that content so that it can be shared across different places. And here's just sort of a really basic example of how it's working throughout the system. So at the current moment, we have these aggregators baking doc maps, as it makes a lot of sense for the people that are already taking in all of this content and all of this metadata to be able to put it together. For this particular preprint actually has 2 doc maps out there because there are 2 different aggregators that are indexing it. So we have Society and Early Evidence Base both creating doc maps for this preprint. Then it's, as Tamara explained, it's released via the API. You can go and view all of the metadata there. And then it can be read again by other consumers of doc maps. In this case, someone like bioRxiv can then go read the API, see all of the information and see its history, and display it, whether it's part of its community reviews tab so that others can view it. So in terms of where we are in the process as the DocMaps project, at present, we have over 10,000 DocMaps that exist for preprints. So that means there are about 10,000 preprints that have DocMaps that show review processes in action. We've been piloting it through, as I said, through eLife, EMBO, and Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. We've also been working on trying to make it easier for developers and other organizations out there to start producing and consuming DocMaps. So we've been building a software development kit as well as documentation that sort of explains this process and explains the technology behind it. And we've also been talking with the wider community involved in preprint review to get an understanding of what metadata is being produced, what metadata is being collected, and what kinds of things they would want to see, things like how would this information be useful or visualized to people who are engaging in these platforms. And then we're currently working on things like improving our interoperability standards. So having these doc maps be available and readable to other people. And so what kinds of things should people be looking for? Integrating with other community standards that are out there. We've heard about MECA. We know that standards like Crossref already exist. How do we make sure that the things that we're building are interoperable with everything else that's out there? And then onboarding and creating more partnerships to coordinate and sustain doc maps in the future. Like I mentioned before, I think the primary goal of DocMaps is supporting a distributed preprint review ecosystem. So, whether you're coming at this through looking at bioRxiv and looking at community reviews or dashboards, whether you're going into Review Commons, whether you're going into Peer Community In and doing review or undergoing review for your own work, we're already engaging in preprint review in some way. And so now this is sort of the thing that ties it all together of understanding that this is all part of a larger conversation out there. You should be able to see if one preprint is being reviewed in all these different places. DocMaps is a way of sort of making it easier to jump through the ecosystem and see all of that work there. And with that, I will take a step back and allow us to sort of get into some of the questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Emily. And thank you, everybody, all of the presenters. There are a bunch of questions that have come in. And one of the, I think, people were very excited to see the cat, as is that's always popular in a Zoom webinar. So maybe we can find out what the cat's name is, and then everybody will be satisfied with that. Emily, it was your cat.
Yeah, this is Pippin. This is usually his time of morning when he starts waking up. So
Yeah, my cat came howling through a little while ago, but my mute was on, so that didn't. And she doesn't get on the desk. She doesn't like it up here. Okay, so Emily, I have a couple of follow-up questions around DocMaps. And there is, I think Toma talked about the Core's Notify project. Is that, are you familiar with that? Do you know, can you do a comparison between what that does and what DocMaps does?
yeah, sure. So the Core Notify project sort of at space, it's got Notify in its title. And so their idea is about being able to send notifications from one platform to another, largely privately. And so making sure that there's these notifications can happen and can be stored in some way. What Notify doesn't necessarily always talk about is what is contained inside of those notifications. And so DocMaps is more on the other side of thinking about, okay, what are you actually sending to another organization? And so what we like to think about for DocMaps is sort of, you've got the entire history laid out right there, whereas Core Notify is focused on this one event has happened and we want to notify someone else about it. We do work with Notify. We've talked to them a lot about their work. And we're making sure that the things that we build are compatible with what they're doing. We're working on similar technologies and systems.
Right. Okay, great. And I also want to add in, because there's been some question about how that fits into the Manuscript Exchange Common Approach project. The DocMap document can be included in a Mecha package. It goes in as a file. There's not yet an API version of Mecha, but that's being worked on. So that is just to sort of create a circle there. These different services, these different technologies are all working together to help move information and files around the ecosystem. And then there was another follow-up, Emily. How is DocMaps different from Crossref or other standards that are out there?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we don't expect DocMaps to be like one standard. There's obviously different standards that fit different situations. And we actually take a lot of the metadata that's included in a DocMap from Crossref. So if you've used Crossref and you're familiar with it, what's in there is sort of the basic information about the document and its current status. But one of the challenges in working with a distributed ecosystem is that you have to have multiple people submitting to Crossref and to include all of that information in there. So you might see in Crossref that there is an article that has a preprint, or you might see a preprint that is connected to a later article, but that requires someone to go in and update that information and let Crossref know. In our case with DocMaps, it's created by a particular publisher or by an aggregator. So they have some of that information. They might also have additional context. And we can include some of these things regarding, like, here are all the individual participants, depending on what's there. You can include some more detail if you wanted. And so really the difference is that we're focused on a different aim, right? Crossref is looking at trying to catalog everything out there, and we're really focused on, here is the preprint that we have, and here's the information that we have about it. And also that these two can work in context. You could build a DocMap without Crossref metadata, but why duplicate your efforts when you can take what's already there and include it and expand upon what's there?
Thank you very much. Richard, a couple of questions came in early, and one of them, they were hoping that you could speak to how preprint review is surfaced in bioRxiv and medRxiv, and I do think that was shown a bit. They're asking, is it in the user interface, displayed in DOI metadata? Like I said, I do think we did see that, but maybe if you just wanted to give us a reminder?
Yeah, so for the human reader, every bioarchive article has, you see just below the abstract, there's a series of icons, which we call the dashboard launcher. If you click on that, it brings up the panels on the right hand side, which is where you see the peer reviews. So if you see numbers in that dashboard launcher, that tells you that there are peer reviews, there's community reviews, etc. That's for the human reader. It's obviously not built into the bioarchive DOI because that's already been posted. But I think as Thomas made clear, that and obviously this is what DocMaps is. One of the things DocMaps wants to do is you need to have ways in which a machine is made aware that there's a peer review of these. And so one of the things is if the DOI, Thomas, you will know more about it than me, but when you have you assign a DOI to a preprint review, in that DOI data, I think it will say is a review of, and that creates an edge in the network, correct? So DocMaps is another way of doing it. So there's the way we would surface it on bioarchive, which is a visual trigger that there are peer reviews here, and up pops the window on the right hand side, which we use the hypothesis annotation tool to generate. And then the machine reading will find it by the connections, not because it's in the bioarchive papers changed, but the connections should be made through DOI connections or DocMaps. But I don't know, Emily, do you want to jump in at this stage?
Sorry, do you mind just repeating the last bit? My computer cut out.
Oh, just about how the connections, how DocMaps can make a connection between a preprint review and a preprint or the DOI record. It just seems that's what we're talking about is discovery routes for machines.
Yeah, so I mean, what we base a lot of DocMaps on is by able to have this DOI connection that you can have there, and then being able to show through the API. So right, you saw in the DocMap that was example, you've got the DOI, the URI that you can link back to and go through, and that all of these reviews as well either have DOIs or URIs that can go connected as well.
So that shows the importance of persistent identifiers and why so many of us on the tech side in scholarly communication love persistent identifiers. Thomas, did you have anything to add to that, or did Richard cover it?
No, I think it covers. I mean, for us, it was one of the main motivation to assign DOIs to benefit from the cross-ref relationships. In the end, that's sort of the major use case.
I mean, just to add there, I think what's going to be interesting going forward is that, when you have a very formal form of preprint review, like what Thomas describes, there'll be a sort of formal connection between this is a review of this thing. But what's kind of interesting, going back to this notion of the evolving ecosystem, is that you can imagine that there may be many different types of review, things going on in parallel, things that resemble less and less traditional review. I mean, we talked about pre-review. That's a slightly different thing when an independent group of people or a crowd of you decide to look at something. How is that surfaced in the network? And that's why I think things like DocMap and Society and and early evidence base are important, because you're going to end up with this kind of with this thing with a persistent identifier and these kind of cloud of events that take place in time that people are going to want to be alerted to. So that's why it's important that we have these systems that let people know these things are happening.
Right. Great. Just sticking with you for a bit, Richard, there was another question about the relationship between an independent peer review service and a journal. How does it work? This person, anonymous attendee, said, I'm sure journals would love to offload the burden of chasing their reviewers for responses, but how do they control the incoming flow of submissions? Is it ad hoc? Can you give the independent service a quota of X papers per month?
Well, I think it varies. I mean, in some ways, Thomas is probably the person who's better equipped to answer that question. But I think, I think independent review services can work in a number of different ways. They can be things where the flux is controlled by an author. An author says, I'm going to go to this place. I'm going to get my peer reviews, and then I'll take them to a journal. And then the question is whether or not it's a journal that will accept them. I think, it's very clear to me that there are different types of journals, there are different types of editors. I mean, I think there's some editors and journals who will be very happy to essentially outsource the evaluation through peer review, and then they make the judgment about whether they want to take it. There undoubtedly will be editors who say, I want to choose the peer reviewers myself. And I mean, again, PCI and Review Commons may have some experience of that, but I think the thing that I think is important is it forces us to think about what do we mean by peer review. Right now, it's so many things are conflated in peer review, and as the perspective from EMBO is that the peer review is an evaluation, in some respects, a kind of technical evaluation of the paper, and then an editorial judgment is made separately, which is a nice way of looking at it. I think other people will look at it differently. So, I mean, I think the answer that's a sort of long-winded response, but I think the answer is to the question is it really kind of depends on the journal, and it depends on the peer review service. And I think we're going to have a kind of a real spectrum of behaviors there, which I think is kind of interesting because it gives people more options. But I mean, maybe Denis or Thomas want to comment, because I think they'll probably know more about this than me.
Yeah, sure.
Well, go ahead.
No, I can comment on this. I see. So peer review, it's not only peer review, it's the quality of peer review. I do agree that this is a technical evaluation, but the technical evaluation vary greatly depending on the peer review service, depending on reviewers. And we are very keen about be very attentive on the quality of the peer review. And sometimes the quality of the peer review is not good enough. So we do not consider this as sufficient to be part of the recommendation process. So that's really important.
Yeah, maybe from our side, I would hesitate a little bit to reduce the peer review to technical evaluation. I think in the case of Review Commons, we want actually to go beyond the mere technical evaluation and also to have an evaluation from the reviewers about what we call the significance, which is not that such a great term, but really benefit from the expertise of experts in the field who worked for a long time in the field to say how what is the context of a given scientific work, which I think really goes beyond purely technical peer review. Now, what we try to dissociate is sort of the editorial filtering and aggregation, which is a very important function of the journals. And we do think that this is sort of, clarifying the role of the journal, which is really important. In our case, the journals remain completely independent to reject the paper. There is no guarantee to be published. There is no pressure to publish from on the side of the journals. And in that sense, we try to dissociate the function of the journals, which is aggregation, ultimate quality control, enforcing revision, sort of standardizing a given output, etc., which are all functions of the journals. And maybe we can discuss if it's important or not, or if it deserves 3,000 or 300. But we see the peer review process as going beyond just is that sound science. We think it goes beyond that.
And just if I may try to complement also these answers, or try to answer exactly the question of Richard. Well, it depends a lot on the editors in chief or the editors of journals. Some of them are very interested to get some peer reviews and some assessment that are outside the journals, and this is the reason why at PCI we have about 30 or 40 PCI-friendly journals that commit to accept articles that have been gone through a recommendation of PCI. But there are many journals where the editors are not happy at all with this kind of system, and they want to keep their power to decide what is good, what is not good for their journals, etc. So, for instance, the result of that is that we only have about 90 PCI-friendly journals. There are many more journals in the world, even in biology. So it means that many journals are not very interested by outsourcing completely their editorial process, and they want to keep power on this. But we understand that. but I think that there is a diversity and we have to work with this diversity.
Okay. Great. And in a sense, there were a couple of other questions that I think have partly been answered here, but I'll just to check in. Is one of the questions was, is there a benchmark for the reviewers, and how do you sign them or get them signed up? I think so. Talking about a benchmark for the reviewers and how do you find them? That was at the time that question came in, it was Review Commons that was talking, but you know, that's certainly a question for all of the services. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe very briefly from the side of Review Commons. So we use reviewers, in part reviewers that we have used before in the context of the journal. So we have sort of this relationship of trust and experience, but of course we ask many more new reviewers, and in a way we measure the diversity of the reviewer pool, and at Review Commons is sort of 3 to 4 times larger than at the journals, because we have to recruit more reviewers. The quality is assessed by the editors who commission the review, and they read the review, and they also flag if there are issues. Having said that, it is an important question, because peer review is not equal peer review across journals, across publishers, across fields. And we try to work on maybe trying to find sort of modest objective measurements using AI of the quality of the peer review, or maybe the depth of the peer review, or its overlap with the paper. And this is really sorely missing at the moment, to be able to compare peer review process across platform. And this is going to be more and more important, I think, in the future.
I can PCI, and at PCI, the invitation of reviewers is completely controlled by the recommenders, the associate editors. So like in the journal, he's inviting or she's inviting. They invite reviewers via the PCI platform. So there is a database of users. They can invite reviewers from these databases, but of course they can invite reviewers from outside the PCI databases. So the quality of the reviews is controlled by the recommenders in relationship with managing board that can decide that a review is not necessarily good enough to be added in the reviewing process.
And what about diversity in the reviewer pool? How do you ensure diversity?
So what we ask recommenders to pay attention on diversity and geographic diversity and gender diversity. So we try to push recommenders to pay attention in that.
We, as a first step for us, was to actually measure diversity across our journals and across Review Commons. So we have done that, and this is where we saw quite a bit of differences across journals and fields. And the second, we use an AI tool that allows to encourage some geographic enrichment or not, or deplete from the well-known geographical privileged regions for reviewers, and also to monitor for predicted gender, which is of course only inference and not real. So we try to put a healthy pressure. We try also to recruit more early career researchers and to bring them in the loop to again refresh the pool of reviewers.
Tony, just to tell that we have an additional feature that can improve diversity is that recommenders can decide to put a preprint they evaluate in what we call a reviewer list, a need of preprint in need of a reviewer. So in that case, every user can see this list of preprints in need of reviewers, and they can be willing. They can raise the hand and saying, okay, I'm willing to review this preprint. In that case, the recommender will receive an alert, have a look on the profile of the user, and may decide to include these reviewers in the reviewing process. So that's a way to increase diversity in the evaluation process.
Great.
And also,
go ahead.
Sorry, Tony, it was just about this problem of diversity. We had to struggle a lot for the recruitment of recommenders, because we are The PCI organization comes from France, so it is a European country, it is a northern country, etc. So we had a lot of candidature of scientists to become recommender coming from Europe, coming from North America, etc. So we had to struggle a lot against this to try to balance the composition and the characteristics of all the recommenders in PCI. And this has been very, very difficult, and sometimes we had to be quite abrupt and decide not to recruit anymore any European for this PCI because it is not balanced enough, etc., etc. So it is a very difficult problem, and we have not solved it completely, but we are still trying to struggle to get more balance and more diversity. It's very difficult.
Right. Yeah, and I just want to stick a little while longer with some of these sort of process and procedure questions, particularly around the peer review. I've combined a few of the questions here. One area where people are asking about is around what are there public standards? What constitutes a peer? What constitutes a peer review, and what qualifies a person to act as a peer review or a peer reviewer? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? No, nothing.
Yes, many. But I think this is a very difficult or dangerous question because it depends so much on the context and on the field. So to obtain a generic answer to that is valid across field is almost impossible, and depending on the use case. So I think what one has to sort of formulate, what is a peer review in the context of a journal that is selective and so on and so on. We see the peer review as a fundamental process in the scientific process to really submit a piece of work to critical review to colleagues or experts, and that's sort of the peer review. Now, the peer is also a difficult definition. What constitutes a peer and what is an expert? And at the end of the day, it is very much it is difficult to have black and white definition that define this process. What is the function of peer review? There are also disagreements in that sense. For some like us, we really want the peer review to look at the conclusions, the evidence. Is that true? Does it hold? What's the strength of the evidence? Now, the peer review has other functions also, which is to help the authors to make their paper better. For journals, peer review has slid into a way to select, the top papers for their journal such that it becomes stratospheric. So it is difficult to come up with standards that are true and hold across fields. The practice in different fields, whether it's cell molecular biology, genomics, computational biology, social science, physics, mathematics, are also widely different.
Right.
It was a non-answer.
Yeah, no, I mean that I think many of us realize the differences in the journals and the who reads them, who reviews them, what those researchers are like, what they expect. So it is a broad question.
I maybe just the second part of the question is, what qualifies a person to act as a peer review. We had this meeting at Janelia to discuss, precisely about that. What is a reviewed preprint? And there was a lot of debate about that. There was one consensus that, what does not qualify a person is a person who has a strong conflict of interest. So certainly in the standards, the declaration of conflict of interest is sort of a core consensus for the practice of peer review. It's not your friend and should not be your enemy.
Right.
And also just maybe to add some ideas about what should be a peer review. So at PCI, we have thought about this question a lot, and we have some difficulties to reply this question, but we also always have a look to some disciplines, to some fields where the question may be simpler to answer. And one of the field is, for instance, mathematics. In mathematics, the question is simpler because if you want to review a paper, you basically have to make the demonstration that is in the paper. And if the demonstration is okay, then it is okay. If the demonstration is full, then it is not okay. So we look at this naive, idealistic view, and we try to go into the same direction, but with all the obstacles that we may have in addition to mathematics, because we work in biology with experiments, with very long experiments, with very heavy work, etc., etc. So we try to go to this very simple idea of we try to do it again, okay? So the reviewer should be able to do it again, should be able to verify all steps of the logic, of the coherence, of the steps of the experiment, etc., etc., but with the constraints that he may not be able to make the experiments again at home. But the basic idea is this one, okay? If we could repeat everything, if we could reproduce everything, including the analysis, but also the experiment, the surveys, etc., it would be fantastic and perfect. We are not able to do that, but we try to go in that direction. Yeah, this is my answer.
And
It's great. I like it a lot. Just to say, I think this is really exactly the way to go. It's great.
And Thomas, an additional comment, Tony, on that is that I do agree with you, Thomas Lemberger, that the fact that there's a diversity on the way peer review is done, depending on community, and that's one strength for PCI, because there are several communities. So in each community, they can lead the way they are doing peer review in the way they used to do in their field, and that's important to have this diversity as well. Because you have now PCI in humanities, for example, PCI organization studies, and of course it is very different from peer review in biology, for example, of course.
So, are the names typically transferred along with comments? Are those rules that are solid, or are those options? What, as far as identification of people, how does that work for the transfer of the reviews?
So for review comments, it's simple. We transfer the identity of the reviewers to the journals, but the identity remains anonymous to the public and to the authors. So it's confidential access to the identity to the journals where the paper is being transferred, and the reviewers are informed upfront that this is what they signed for.
So at PCI, it's almost the same, but the only difference is that the reviewers can decide to be anonymous or not publicly for the publication of the reviews on the PCI website. But then, and they know that upfront, if there is a transfer of the peer reviews to journals, then their name is disclosed to the journal. But this is made privately if they decided to be anonymous at the first step. And we decided to do that because there are many reasons in favor and against the fact of being anonymous reviewer. And we could not solve this question, so we decided to let the reviewers decide themselves.
Mm-hmm. Richard, what percentage of bioRxiv preprints have a peer review overall?
A peer review overall. Well, I mean, if you include journals, then it's probably around 80%. I mean, obviously the vast majority of peer reviews, but if the question is what percentage of them have peer reviews displayed on bioRxiv, then that's much lower. I don't know. It would be the fraction that are PCI and Review Commons and eLife. So yeah, I don't have a number for that. I would guess it, I don't know, 10% or something like that, 15%, because bear in mind, the vast majority of journals don't put peer reviews up, but the total number of bioRxiv papers that are ultimately peer reviewed and published in journals is something like 80%.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that was a question that came in from the participants. So Emily, there's a question here. Could a publisher use DocMaps to identify preprints and enable bidirectional linking between a preprint and an article published in a journal?
Yeah, so ideally a publisher could do that. At the moment, we're not prioritizing publication in journal. We're focused on sort of the peer review aspect first rather than publication. But we're working on something similar with, if there is a review that happens on one platform and they want to know, hey, has this actually been reviewed anywhere else? We're working on that sort of thing. So you can be able to see, great, there are peer reviews happening elsewhere in the system. Do you know that the peer review is actually happening on my platform as well? And certainly that kind of thing, that kind of example could be extended to a publisher. So yes, absolutely, you could use the same technology to do that. We haven't done that yet, but it's something we could work towards.
Right. And then there's some sort of bigger, more existential questions here that I think would be interesting to tackle. Vincent Lizzie asked, how would you describe the differences between a preprint and an author's original version of an article? Is a preprint distinct from an author's original version? With the peer review of preprints as shown today, it appears that a preprint may have significant differences from the author's original version of an article, with potentially many enhancements added. In a disclosure, I'm part of the working group updating the NISO journal article version recommendation. Oh, I didn't read that part, but so let's go ahead and does anybody, Richard, I thought maybe you might
well,
have
I can jump in. I mean, I think it's it depends, it kind of depends what you mean by the author's original version. I mean, what happens is, I write an article, it probably sits in a Word file on my computer. Is that the original version? Then I send it to Thomas privately and he says, hey, you screwed up all these bits, you need to change this before you let anyone read it. Then, so I change it, is that no longer the author's original version? Then I put it on bioRxiv, that's probably the same one. And then I revise it in response to some reviews. So I think it's difficult. I mean, I think probably the quick answer is that the first version of the preprint is like the author's original, and then the second version of a preprint is equivalent to the revised version. I think that for me the critical change is what I like to think of as a state change, which is when a third party makes some assertion about it. So if PCI or a journal or somebody says, we are going to make a kind of like assertion about this on the basis of those peer reviews. So the obvious version is the journal accepts it and they say this is a different thing. We are making some claim about this paper, as PCI Journal or Nature or JBC. We are making a claim. We have accepted it because we are convinced that this passes our bar. Now, we can argue about whether that bar is important or good or whatever, but what they're doing is they're creating a new DOI and they're saying that they're doing that because there's some kind of judgment. And that's kind of, that's what happens with the PCI Journal. It's a bit of a gray area with whether Review Commons constitutes that. I don't think so, because kind of what Review of Commons are doing is saying they're explicitly not doing that because they want to leave open the opportunity for somebody else to say that later. They're giving information that allows somebody to make that judgment. To me, that's the critical point. But I mean, you could, if you want, you can put an article on bioRxiv and continue revising it forever.
So, if I may, in line with this answer of Richard, at PCI we do not recommend a preprint. Actually, we do recommend a version of the preprint, and that's important. So, for example, version 5 of the preprint. So it means it's a particular manuscript. It's not the original manuscript deposited in bioRxiv.
Can a reviewer revise their review? Is that something that happens? I mean, that was another question that had come in. I didn't think so, but I thought I'd let the expert get into that.
So sometimes, rarely, we ask the reviewers to revise their review before we send them to the authors and before we post in public. And these are cases where the language is a little bit too robust. And so we ask the reviewers, we provide clear suggestion to tone down a little bit the potential, the latent aggression in the tone, to make the review more neutral while keeping all the points intact. So these are instances where we ask the reviewers to edit. Otherwise, we have this consultation at the end of the process where reviewers comment on each other, but that does not really result into any alteration of the original report. They are sort of added at the end as the product of this consultation.
Richard, did you have a comment?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting. Obviously, there's a scenario Thomas described, but there's another scenario, which is where a reviewer makes some kind of statement, and then that is rebutted by an author. That may be a rebuttal that is effective, and then the reviewer may say, okay, you've answered my question. But I think that the important thing there is that you have an iterative process, and just like the manuscript, the versions are recorded. So you're not removing the original statement by the referee, but you are saying that it has been addressed. So I think that's, and I think everybody on this call feels things work like that.
Yeah, Richard, you're correct. For PCI, there are often several rounds of peer reviews, and the reviewers, the first reviewers, can then have a second review on the second round of peer review and be satisfied or not by the answer of the authors. Also, to jump on the answer of Thomas, we also have sometimes the possibility to change. It's not us, it's just if the recommenders is not completely satisfied by the peer review, they can ask the reviewers to add or to improve or to make a more in-depth reviews of the manuscript that happened. And also the managing board can say, okay, for a recommendation, for example, it's not enough. It's not like a news and views. There is not enough context and all that. So sometimes there's some exchanges between the managing board and the recommender to improve the recommendation text.
So here's another interesting, I think, multifaceted question that will require some thinking. This questioner says, it's nice to make the process transparent, but I really fear that in the near future, I will have to read the whole review documentation in addition to the article, especially when there's no additional review done, which I assume they mean an editorial review, but I don't want to put words in their mouth. As we've witnessed open access culture first being hacked by malicious predatory publishers and then sequestered by the big 5 publishing corporations, is it really important to work on trust relations? But this is getting more and more complicated in the global publication process. Really what they're asking about is how do we build the necessary trust, both socially as well as technologically? It's like I said, it's sort of a multifaceted question, and those words are coming from the questioner. There, I didn't editorialize in there, so.
I know, go ahead.
Well, one thing I would say immediately is the prompt for that question, right, is the notion that we're at a point right now where we have a problem with trust. Okay, when we talk about predatory publishers, I sort of say, I was saying to somebody recently, I've just written an article about this, that we're at the point that the statement that something has been peer reviewed alone has almost no meaning now, because there are so many people who will make that statement, and it's not worth the it's not worth the paper it's written on. And, you know, one of the things that things like DocMaps and responsible peer review organizations like PCI and Review Commons want to do, and transparency can help with this, is say, you know, peer review should be done by kind of trusted experts, etc. But and we need ways to demonstrate that, you know, that some assurance that this is somebody who knows what they're talking about, some assurance that some form of identity verification has taken place, etc. And, you know, and transparency and information about that process is the like of which DocMaps is providing helps get you there. It, you know, I mean, it has its own issues. You know, it's more work for everybody. It means, you know, you have to think about how you do this. But it's got to be better than a situation where somebody says, I read this article in journal you've never heard of. It claims that, you know, they've done cold fusion. I have no idea. You know, I don't know the editors. I've never heard of the journal. They claim to have peer reviewed it. There's no information. Surely it's better if you have a situation where somebody says, you know, here's the claim. Here are all the people who've evaluated. Here's the substance of their evaluation. And here are all these reasons to think that you can have you know, you can have more confidence in both the original claim and the review. But sorry, Denis, you jump in.
Now that I obviously fully agree with you, Richard. What I would say also is that we definitely still need somebody above the reviewers that claim, that endorse the reviews done by reviewers. Saying, because it certifies that the reviews have been done seriously, and also it's not only peer-reviewed. The level, the threshold reached by the article is sufficient to be declared as valid scientifically, and we still at PCI believe that it is important to have editorial decision on top of the evaluation process. This would avoid also readers to have to read the paper and all the reviews to make his own view of the paper, and sometimes they are not competent enough to say, okay, I read the paper, but I cannot read the reviews. I'm not competent enough, and I need a way to know if it is valid scientifically or not. And this is why endorsement by editors, associate editors, are really important to our point of view.
Yeah, this gets, I mean, Tom alluded to the meeting that we were both at on preprint review, and this really does get to a big debate about preprint peer review, but peer review in general. And, you know, does it mean, if you say something is peer reviewed, does that mean that there are peer reviews? You know, is a paper that has been sent to a journal and there are peer reviews, and the peer reviews say this is terrible, it's rejected, is that a peer-reviewed paper? I mean, it has peer reviews, it's undergone peer review, but I think that, you know, the common understanding is not that. The common understanding when people talk about the peer-reviewed literature is the idea that it has peer reviews, and then somebody has said, okay, that's good enough. And I think this is, you know, I mean, this is the you know, eLife view it in one way. I think lots of other people view it in a different way, and we're still, you know, that experiment is going on. There's a learning experience, but it does get to the point that Denis makes, that ultimately there are people who don't understand the content and want to know if they can have confidence in it. And I'm not quite sure how we get there, but it may be a few different routes.
Yeah. I mean, globally, I really agree with all what was said, and I think transparency is one of the key really to foster trust. I see that also as a chain of trust. The authors have to trust the platform that it will do a good job. The platform has to trust that the reviewer are doing a good job, and then the platform has to, the journal has to, that receive this review process or reviewed preprint, have to trust that the whole thing is proper, and the journal will have to trust back the authors that the revisions have really been made and not invented. And I think what we are facing now is sort of, you know, this chain of trust that we were taking for granted is dissociated in several steps, and we have to maintain across all these steps, this chain of trust intact. And if something is breaking or misused, it may endanger the whole enterprise. And I think we have to all to think how to do that. And I really agree that transparency and traceability are the best weapons, really, at every single steps, that there is no obscurity. Now, of course, the elephant in the room is AI and the GPT clones that are going to help us to write the papers, but more and more are going to read the papers for us. And I think, yes, you can access the preprint and the reviews, and maybe you have to read them. If this is the first thing that is being available in public, it's actually much better than not having anything. But eventually, maybe these papers will not even be read so frequently anymore, and you're going to ask GPT or the competition to summarize them on the fly. And again, here, transparency, citability, are going to be key to have any level of trust of this information. So I think this issue of trust is going to be absolutely central in publishing, and get a completely new dimension. And I think we all have to think how to deal with that.
Right. I mean, transparency is certainly one answer. There, I think at the root of the question, or at least part of the question is, okay, today I trust the logo and the brand name of that journal. I know that they've done the review. It's and that that is the same way that we evaluate other consumer products. We know that we like that product. We know that it's a quality product because of the name that's on that. I would my guess is that over time, all of your organizations will gain the similar trust in your logos and in what you do. I think DocMaps is certainly an important method for transparency, and showing the process that took place behind the research, and behind the evaluation of that research. I think that's just one measure, but I think it's a useful and important measure. Emily, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this fear is not limited to academic publishing, right? DocMaps actually comes out of the idea of misinformation in news media, and having that, right, needing, you trust the New York Times because it has this brand, but also they deal with misinformation, and being able to see the track changes and the versioning happens there. So I think this is a legitimate fear, right, in some ways, because it's not just present in this one space, it's present in lots of the spaces. And so being able to build trust in all these different ways is incredibly important.
Richard, did you have a comment too?
Yeah, I guess one question I have is whether or not, when we took, if the number of peer review services increase, whether we will see kind of more formal ways of registering and authenticating people to increase trust. I mean, there are various ways in which this happened beyond the brand right now. With PubMed, if you want to be in PubMed, you have to jump through various editorial and technical hoops. If you want to be in Web of Science, you have to be evaluated by the Web of Science editorial team. Do we get to a point where, that people say, okay, if you're a preprint review service, there's various ways in which you have to register and various criteria you have to satisfy. There have been approaches to try and do this in the past. That was set up by Adam Etkin, and that kind of never got legs, but it seemed to me that it was on the right track. And I can't help thinking whether some combination of kind of like a pre-like idea and DocMaps, in which you say, oh, I've never heard of peer community, and then you go to the website and it's more than just a thing. There's something. I mean, in Britain, you'd call it the ideal standards or whatever, but there are various, there are things that you could, there are ways in which you can have kind of, sort of bodies that are set up to register and authenticate people. And I tend to think we're probably going to need more of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I know a lot of the conversations that I've had around research integrity and my involvement around STM's Integrity Hub, it does sort of point toward people need to there need to be trust signifiers around people, and that we need to be sure that people are who they say they are, and that's really difficult. Denis, did you have a a comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, no, it's not a comment, it was a question to Richard. I was wondering beyond PCI review comments and eLife, do you have like other peer review services that just knock the door and to be added to TRIPS? And how do you trust them? I mean, if there's a new peer review service, how you will integrate them? What are the rules to integrate them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Right now, the number of services are small. We have added you know, a handful, and you know, I mean, most of them we have reason to trust them already, but you do get to a point. I mean, I think one of the things we say with TRIP is, you know, that the organization is accountable, you know, and they have to agree to, as you know, agree to abide by certain principles. And if they don't, then we would remove them. And I think this is interesting. I mean, that's one of the things that we did with TRIP, was we made it was very clear, if you participate in that TRIP project, it's a project in which authors have opted in. So authors choose to go to PCI, authors choose to go to Review Commons. You know, authors don't choose to have somebody write a blog post about their article. So those don't go in TRIP, right? So I think that's one of, in some ways, there's a level of kind of trust there on behalf of the author. But it's a good question, and you know, we don't have a formal means for authenticating people right now, but you would imagine that there's a number of, you know, we would do all the usual things to check they are who they say they are, you know, from within the academic community, etc. I mean, I do think it's important. I think, you know, I don't know how many people are familiar with this, but when you start some of these initiatives, there is a danger that they can be gamed or manipulated. I don't know if anybody saw this recently. There's a new, I don't know very much about it, I had heard about it. There's a new peer review initiative called Chaos, QEIOS. And I think, I'm not disparaging them at all. It sounds like it's very well-meaning and well-intentioned, but I saw that there was a whole bunch of scientific racists who started using it. And of course, then you can get a kind of like sort of a bootstrapping where suddenly, you know, a load of other people come along and say, this is great, because they're all part of this same fringe group. And so suddenly you get this kind of bogus authenticity, because lots of people are voting things up and saying this is correct. So you have to, it's very difficult. You have to be very careful about that within the sciences. And so it's that, hence, you know, Denis' question is a really good one. And I don't have an easy answer.
Yeah, I mean, science and social media, there are often a lot of issues around what happens when people are allowed, when the commons, the people are able to just start voting things up and down. That we want the experts to be the ones doing the voting up and down, or at least providing meaningful and useful commentary, not just voting things up or down, right?
Yeah, well, the joke I always tell in that situation is, like, a few people have said to me in the past, they said, oh, it should work like Yelp or eBay. And I always say, have you ever used Yelp or eBay?
Oh, yeah. So Thomas, you had a comment?
Yeah, just about this problem of trust. Maybe we can think that the problem of trust has arisen because publication has become like something like a currency for employment, for positions, for getting funds, for etc., etc. So getting papers published has become something that is quantitatively a currency, okay? And this is the basis of the problem. And I think that in most part of the world, this problem is not tackled, okay? We do not try to solve this specific problem that the publications have become currencies, quantitative currencies. But in some place of the world, in some specific places, there are some movements, there are some changes where the funders, the employers, etc., try to go outside the system and try to go toward the more qualitative evaluation of the people, of the scientists, for employment, for careers. evaluation, for project evaluation, etc., etc. And for instance, in Europe, there is a very strong move toward this qualitative assessment of peoples, of projects, etc., where they try not to consider publication as a quantitative currency, but maybe something as a qualitative characteristic of the project, of the people, etc. And there are more and more narrative evaluations also. And I think that this may go toward the good direction, because I'm not sure that we are going to solve this problem of trust with technical things, okay? I'm not sure of that, because if it continues to go toward the direction of a market where publication are currencies, I'm sure that there will be thieves, there will be cheaters all the time, everywhere, always. But if we can change the markets and change the evaluation process towards something much more qualitative, we may solve the things. So Europe may be a model. The Netherlands are a model for that. In France, there is a very strong political moves to go outside this system, and I think I think that they are good models to solve this problem of trust.
Right. Well, we're basically, I see something we can answer real quick is know of one right off the top of their heads. So no, huh? Okay. Well, I'm sorry, Barbara, we don't have an answer for you. Although maybe Emily looks like maybe she's providing some help there. So okay, well, I think we're basically out of time. Let's end this right on the hour. I want to thank the panelists for all of their help putting this together and for all of the great information that they've imparted. And this was a great conversation. Like I said, the conversation part is often the most interesting part of the webinar. We've had a great turnout today, and I really thank all of the attendees also for sticking with us and for participating.
Thanks to you, Tony.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was this is a lot of fun. And so
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Everyone.
goodbye, everybody.
Okay, bye, everybody.